Violence, fraud allegations, low turnout. Afghanistan's elections were fraught with obstacles, yet it seems that nearly 4 million people braved the odds to cast their votes. But is the election credible? And do Afghanistan's people believe in democracy? This is Inside Story. Hello there, thanks for joining us. I'm Shuli Ghosh. Well, the votes are now being counted in Afghanistan after the country held its parliamentary elections over the weekend. It's been a rocky road to the ballot box. Even before the vote, there were claims of electoral violations, and the election itself was overshadowed by violence and claims of widespread corruption. At least 11 civilians were killed during bomb explosions and rocket attacks, and election observers reported fake voter cards and ballot stuffing in several provinces. Sue Turton reports from Kabul.
In northern Afghanistan, the human cost of election day was revealed. The bodies of 3 election workers who were kidnapped as the polls opened were dumped in Balkh province. And in neighbouring Kunduz, the governor said 6 children had been killed by a shell that had failed to explode on election day. With the votes counted, the results were posted locally, giving candidates and voters a chance to see who had swung the vote.
People are coming to check the results outside their polling stations to see who has won in their area. But these results, as well as the ballot boxes full of votes, are now being transferred centrally to Kabul, so the Independent Election Committee can double check whether the lists and the votes in the ballot boxes reconcile.
But the election observers know this is a dangerous time. If the Taliban attack and destroy these sensitive materials as they're transported to Kabul, there'll be no way of checking if the results are honest and accurate. Reports of ballot rigging and fraud are mounting. When we interviewed Dr. Farouk Millaneh last week, a candidate standing in Jalalabad, he believed the level of fraud would stop these elections being fair and free.
This is not democracy. Where is the democracy?
Today he described to us how his observers had seen other candidates bribing voters and how some polling stations had run out of ballot papers. The election authorities had pledged to punish anyone found with fake cards and to disqualify any candidate involved in their distribution. But Dr. Millaneh said anyone found with fakes was arrested, but then later released without punishment. One of the election complaints commissioners said he had no proof yet that fake cards had been a factor in this poll.
Is it a case that they haven't been used, or is it a case that it's just impossible to tell whether some of the voting cards being used were fake or not?
Perhaps they were, perhaps they weren't. We certainly have no basis in sound, testable allegation at this stage to give you any answer on that.
The election authorities have a tough job on their hands. Another election dismissed as fraudulent could embolden the Taliban and weigh heavy on the Obama administration. The US president badly needs a successful poll if he's to bolster flagging public support for American forces' continued presence in Afghanistan. Sue Turton, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
Now, just before I introduce today's guests, I should point out that we were due to be joined by Hamid Karzai's spokesman, Wahid Omar, but he dropped out at the last minute. So let's give a warm welcome to those who have joined us. In Kabul, Nader Nadri, he's the chairman of the Free and Fair Election Foundation in Afghanistan. Also in Kabul, Fahim Dashti, he's the chief editor of the Kabul weekly newspaper. And joining us here in Doha is Peter Galbraith. He's the former UN Deputy Special Representative for Afghanistan. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Nader, let's start with you. You had around 7,000 monitors around the country. What kind of things are they reporting? Irregularities happened during the election?
Well, they have reported throughout yesterday and also reports that were coming today 2 important aspects of this election. Yesterday, we were receiving an overwhelming amount of positive information in terms of people going out and participating in this process. A lower level of security incidents in the early morning. Those were signs of encouragement. It was much better than what was expected in terms of people's participation and security, especially in terms of civilian casualty. But also, as the day was going on, we were receiving information about a large number of irregularities, taking from underage voting, from the problem with the indelible ink, in some places polling stations being occupied by the powerful power brokers, and they intervened in the process. Each and every of these single reports need to be thoroughly looked at it, and there is a heavy job to the officials at the Election Complaint Commission and the Independent Electoral Commission to make sure that the eligible votes and the legitimate votes are distinguished from the non-legitimate votes that were seen largely in different parts of the country, casted in different ways.
Nada, just put it into context for us. Are you personally concerned at the level of irregularities and intimidation that you have heard about?
Well, definitely, intimidation was one of the major issues that concerns us the most. That we have seen in some provinces that the level of intimidation did affect the decision of the voter, and those areas need to be looked at very, very carefully. We are also concerned about some level of proxy votes, as it was seen in the previous election, that it is there this time also, and those areas being recorded, and we are making sure, and we will be loud about it, to make sure those proxy votes are not going to be counted for.
Fahim, what is your take on this? What are your readers saying? What are your reporters saying? Do they have any faith that democracy has happened here?
I think it is happening, but not in a normal way. There are some problems, some challenges we are facing, but still I think basically democracy is going on this or that way. What I have seen with my own eyes, and what I have heard from my reporters and some friends and relatives, the turnout of the people, despite the security concerns as well as the fraud possibilities, was high. And this shows that the people of Afghanistan, although there are problems and challenges, are trying to use their rights to make some changes.
Well, but the turnout overall is being suggested as being at around 4 million. I mean, that's out of 11 million registered voters. That's not very high. That's low.
No, it is low, but comparing to the presidential election, and in comparing to, I mean, as it was expected before the election, that people will not go to vote because they have concerns about the security, and they have concerns about the possibility of fraud. Taking in mind all these possibilities, I think the turnout was much more than expected.
But are you saying you think this election was a success?
Of course, and for the people of Afghanistan, it was a success. But we do not close our eyes to all the problems that this election had, and all the news which will come out tomorrow or the day after tomorrow regarding how many fraud happened, how many people were misusing the governmental power, or this kind of issues. But basically, for the people of Afghanistan, this was a success. They have tried for the fourth time on the last 10 years to use their vote for making some changes for their own and for the new generation of Afghanistan.
Peter, what do you say to that? For the people of Afghanistan, this election was a success.
I think there's no reason to think that's true. First, on the turnout figures, the figures that are cited are the number of votes that are reported. But in Afghanistan, the numbers of votes that are reported doesn't necessarily correlate to the number of people who turned out to vote. In the presidential election, there were about 6 million votes reported, but in the end it turned out 1 million to 1.5 million of the votes for Karzai were fake, so the actual turnout was perhaps in the range of 4.5 million. So we have to see whether this is 4 million or 3 million or some other figure. The second problem with the election, this election in Afghanistan, is that there are no independent figures running the election. The so-called Independent Election Commission consists of people who are appointed by President Karzai. In the last election, they participated in the fraud. In every instance, the commission or its staff either participated in the fraud or knew of it and did nothing about it. This time, Karzai wants to win control of the parliament, and it's his appointees who are running that election. Worse, this time, Karzai has now appointed all the members of what had been previously an independently appointed Electoral Complaints Commission, the body that last time reviewed the results and threw out many fraudulent ballots. This time, they are appointed by Karzai, as are the Provincial Electoral Complaints Commission, the body that works on the local level. So there really is no reason to have any confidence in this process, and I think Afghans don't have confidence, which is one reason why the turnout was actually extremely low. The eligible population to vote in Afghanistan has to be in the neighborhood of 17 million. 4 million is 25%, but again, probably the real figure of people who really voted is less than that.
OK, let's put that point to Nada. Nada, Peter is making the point that the Electoral Complaints Commission, which is going to be the body investigating all these complaints, the members were appointed by Hamid Karzai. So how can we have any confidence that the investigation is going to be transparent?
Well, I do agree with Peter on some of the points he have raised. On the fact that the Independent Complaint Commission is now fully appointed by the President alone, or some level of independence, or some questions are about the independence of the Independent Election Commission. But let's not forget the fact that Afghans coming out yesterday in the most violent circumstances, in the midst of a conflict, where the intimidation from the terrorist groups and the Taliban was overwhelming throughout the campaign period. We had more than 400 female candidates campaigning. Only one have withdrawn in these intimidation. We had more than 2,000 candidates campaigning. That is a step forward to the democratic process of Afghanistan. And yesterday, when we saw even 3 million people came out, I was driving and walking around not only in Kabul but in the districts, and my observers throughout the country was reporting different numbers of turnout. We had provinces where the turnout was doubled in the presidential elections. We had provinces, of course, with a larger number of security incidents like Ghazni. We had lower turnout than the presidential election. All putting together, that indicates that people who risked their life to go to the polling stations, they did send a message to the international community and to the pundits like Mr. Peter Galbraith that they do want a democratic process, and that need to be honored. Yes, of course, the process has its problems, and that's why we are speaking loud and clear that we need to clear those wrongdoings. We will watch the Election Complaint Commission carefully and closely. We will watch the operation and conduct of the Independent Election Commission to make sure that the votes of people are respected and that the unclean vote are cleaned from and put aside. That's not going to be a fully perfect process. There are going to be much more challenges. But what makes us as Afghans optimistic about the process, that despite all the disillusionment that existed with the process, despite all the insecurity and threat from the terrorist groups and Taliban existed, people did risk their life in the most volatile situation to go and cast their vote. And we need to honor that and emphasize on that and build upon. There are lessons that have been learned. We as an observer organization, we learned lessons in the previous election to make sure that we take the result sheets from the polling center. And we applied that to make sure in this election we observe properly and we collect those result sheets. There are people in Afghanistan, they learned lesson also, the pool workers. Those who have lost their life, those need to be honored also, and Afghans need to be supported to walk to this democratic path.
Okay, just before we return to the discussion, let's have a look at what exactly is at stake here. There are 249 seats up for grabs in the lower house of Parliament, known as the Walesi Jirga. Nearly 2,500 candidates stood for election across the country, and that, as Nada Nadri was saying, included nearly 400 women. 11.4 million people were registered to vote out of a population of nearly 30 million. 95% of polling centres had completed the counting process by early Sunday, with very early preliminary results expected maybe over the next few days. Peter, the current parliament, you were saying, dominated by Karzai's opponents. He will presumably be hoping to change that and have his supporters in parliament.
Well, I think that is his goal, and Dr. Abdullah, who was his main challenger in the presidential elections last year, has said that Karzai's goal is to have a big enough majority to change the constitution so he can have a third term. But I think he's embarked on a very dangerous game, and he might be careful about getting what he wishes. The parliament is the place where Afghanistan's non-Pashtun minorities, the Tajiks, the Hazaras, the Uzbeks, have a big voice. And if they feel, and other members of the opposition feel, that they were cheated in these parliamentary elections, there's a risk of conflict, civil war, a big risk that they will reject the authority of the central government even more than they now do. Karzai is, in fact, a very weak leader. His authority doesn't extend much beyond the capital. This could make the situation much worse for him, and, of course, it would make it much worse for the American and NATO troops, because right now they're dealing with what is essentially a conflict within the Pashtun community between the Pashtun Taliban and the government. It could become much more complicated if Afghanistan also end up with conflict along ethnic lines.
Fahim, what do you say to that? If the Afghan people do not accept the results of this election, if they do believe that it's been manipulated, it's flawed, there could be violence. Do you agree?
I think it depends what will come out with the result of the election.
Well, if people do feel cheated, though, if they feel that Parliament has been wrongly stuffed full of Karzai's supporters, could there not be tensions? Could there not be violence?
Of course, I think there will be. As people, most of the Afghans were predicting that there may be some cheating and some fraud on the election. They already sent their messages and their warning to the government that if that happened, then tension may raise and may take another kind of or another sort of phase for it. And I think if the fraud be massive, if the fraud be the number of fraud will be large, then of course people will react. But it's very early to say which kind of reaction we will see, or which kind of result will come out from the.
That is a fair point. That is a fair point, and we do have to wait for the investigations and the results, of course. But what is a fact is that a lot of Afghans are disillusioned with the election process. They became disillusioned after the allegations of fraud, the corruption over the presidential election.
I think nobody wants to go for another war in Afghanistan. This is the fact on the ground. But still, if they feel that their votes has been misused and their rights has been misused and there was cheating and fraud and this kind of stuff, they may react in a violent way, which can have a very negative result for the future of the country, especially for the future of the President Karzai government. And I hope that the commission, the independent commission, as well as the Electoral Complaints Commission, will do their job in a right direction, in a right way. Otherwise, even I am sure that even they know that the reaction of people will be strong and will be very serious.
Let's have a look at some international reaction. Western backers have rallied round the government with praise for those who voted. The UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon said he commends the women and men of Afghanistan for their courage and determination to vote amid significant security challenges. And the commander of international forces in Afghanistan, General David Petraeus, said the voting was a message that the voice of Afghanistan's future does not belong to the violent extremists and terror networks. It belongs to the people. Nada, do you think a flawed election is better than no election at all?
Well, taking the circumstances where the Afghans just started practicing a different way of doing politics, it is very much important to consider these exercises as part of a longer-term process. Democracy is not going to come just in one night and just by one election. People do need to practice it time and again with all the problems and challenges, but the courage that they showed yesterday, that they want this path to walk on, it's worth having it, despite all of their problems. If let's assume that we have decided to not have these elections. The conspiracy theories among those Afghans who think that the government of Afghanistan is trying to have monopoly over everything, and a dictatorship is going to be established by cancelling elections, that would have had a much more severe consequences. That would have contributed to much more extreme level of violence in the minority communities of Afghanistan, in the north of Afghanistan, in central Afghanistan, and much more even in the south of the country. And the Taliban and the terrorists would have had much more reason to tell this government is a dictatorship in the midst of all the corruption and other problems that it has. It is now embarking on a dictatorship.
Let me put that point to Peter, because I want
that Afghans see that.
I wanted to ask Peter, I mean, what Nada has said goes to the heart of this issue. Can you impose democracy from the outside? And are we expecting too much for a perfect example of democracy in Afghanistan at this point?
This is not a discussion about a mildly flawed election or a perfect example of democracy. In the presidential elections, Karzai claimed to have 3 million votes. It turned out at least 1 million of them were phony. They were simply results reported from polling places that didn't exist, and where there were no ballots that went with them. So flaws are one thing. Massive fraud is something else. And frankly, I think Nader's point is very good. The Afghan people do not deserve this. In fact, you had a very civilized campaign, both for president last year and for parliament this year. People had substantive positions. There was a lot to choose from. The problem was that the people running the elections were not prepared to honestly count the votes. That's not such a difficult task. There's no way it's beyond the capability of the Afghans. They simply were being cheated.
Okay, very
can I
quickly,
say a word about the
Peter,
international response?
I'm going to have to cut in there because we are running out of time. Very, very last quick word to Fahim. Do you think the Afghans will regard this election as a success when the results come out? Very quickly.
I have a doubt. I hope so, but I have a doubt.
OK, Fahim, thanks very much indeed for that. And thank you all my guests for joining us here on Inside Story. Nada Nadri, Peter Galbraith and Fahim Dashti. And thanks for watching. If you want to email any suggestions to us, then contact us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. But for the moment, from me, Shuli Ghosh, bye-bye for now.